Okay. Dear chairpersons, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee for the invitation to attend this outstanding meeting. It's a pleasure. It's also an honor. Now, if I want PDS 3034, the administration of metformin in overweight patients was associated with a reduction of 39% in the risk of myocardial infarction versus a conventional diet-based therapy. In the same study, among patients allocated intensive therapy, SUs or insulin, metformin also showed greater effects for any diabetes-related endpoints, mortality and a stroke. And these results were consolidated by more recent data, in particular by a sub-study of the SCOUT trial. In obese type 2 diabetic patients with a high risk of cardiovascular disease, metformin was associated with a lower risk of cardiovascular events when compared with insulin, with a lower risk of all-cause mortality when compared with insulin monotherapy. No, I agree that the safety of metformin has been questioned in diabetic patients with heart failure due to the risk of lactic acidosis. However, recent studies did not support the concern. And in this paper published in Diabetologia, Anderson and co-workers showed that the administration of metformin in patients with heart failure was associated with a significant reduction in all-cause mortality versus sulfonylureas and insulin. So, clearly, metformin in the cardiovascular field is an ally. Let us now move to sulfonylureas. The cardiovascular story of sulfonylureas is more ambivalent. More ambivalent because on one side we have some very alarming data. This is the first part of the story. While on the other side we have more reassuring data. Now let us consider the cardiovascular story of sulfonylureas in its whole. The cardiovascular story of SU started with the UGDP in 1970. The administration of tolbutamide, a first generation SU, the administration of tolbutamide to type 2 diabetic patients was associated with a significant increase in all causes and in cardiovascular causes mortality when compared with the placebo or with insulin. We all know that the UGDP was unfavorably criticized due to some methodological limitations. But the key message of the UGDP, potential cardiovascular toxicity of SUs, remained for a while as a background, due also to more recent papers in the same direction. I'll show you a couple of these papers. In 2012, Rumi and co-workers showed that the administration of sulfonylureas was associated with a 20% increased risk of cardiovascular events or death when compared with metformin. In the same line, Jorgensen showed in patients admitted for myocardial infarction that the use of sulfonylureas was associated during a follow-up of 2 years by an increase 28%, 20% of cardiovascular mortality and morbidity. And finally, very recently, in 2014, Lee and co-workers showed that the risk of incident cardiovascular diseases was significantly increased 30% in the presence of sulfonylureas versus the absence of sulfonylureas. And the risk was correlated with the duration of therapy. So, at this stage, we have an explanation for that at this stage. We have at least 2 explanations. The first explanation is hypoglycemic events, severe hypoglycemic events, which could be linked with the use of sulfonylureas. And the other explanation is an alteration of the ischemic preconditioning phenomenon due to the binding of sulfonylureas to their myocardial cells receptors. So, sulfonylureas seem to be guilty on a cardiovascular point of view. Now, things are probably more complicated than they appear at the first glance, in view of some contradictory data claiming rather for cardiovascular innocence of sulfonylureas. And I'll show you a couple of these data. At the end of the UKPDS post-trial study, the percentage of events, the percentage of myocardial infarction was lower in the intensive group, sulfonylurea insulin group, than in the conventional group. In this meta-analysis, published by Elizabeth Selvin in 2008, the use of sulfonylureas when compared with placebo or another agent was associated not with an increased risk, but with a decrease, a 19% decreased risk of cardiovascular morbidity. In this Italian meta-analysis, in terms of MACE, in terms of cardiovascular events, 8 studies, indeed, in red, indicated favored comparators. More events in the sulfonylureas group than in the comparator group. But the majority of trials did not, in green, and indicate rather neutrality of SUs versus comparators. And finally, in the sub-study of the SCO trial, the primary cardiovascular outcome was exactly the same in the presence or in the absence of sulfonylureas. So, do we have an explanation for these contradictory data? Yes, we have a tentative explanation. Cardiovascular differences between sulfonylureas could be linked with the type of sulfonylurea used. And I show in this line data published in 2011 and showing in patients without or with a past history of myocardial infarction that different cardiovascular endpoints were different with different sulfonylureas, with glycosides being at the lowest risk when compared with metformin. I'll show you also this paper published a few weeks ago and indicated mentioning that total mortality or cardiovascular mortality was very different among types of sulfonylureas, with glimepiride and glycoside being at the lower risk when compared with glibenclamide or with the first generation sulfonylureas. And there is a rationale for this explanation. Sulfonylureas are characterized, different sulfonylureas are characterized by binding differences on their receptors on myocardial cells and consequently on ischemic preconditioning. And this is also the explanation published in an editorial a few years ago by Riddle in the United States. Sulfonylureas differ in effects on ischemic preconditioning. So this is an explanation. It's a unequivocal explanation, since other studies have found that both first and second generation SU use was associated with an excess risk of all-cause mortality. So there are alternative explanations, such as a different diabetes and cardiovascular profile in patients treated with SU, more severe than in patients treated with metformin, or a protective effect, a cardiovascular protective effect of comparators rather than the cardiovascular negative effect of sulfonylureas. Anyway, the cardiovascular safety of SU in 2015 cannot be definitively established and should ideally be evaluated in long-term cardiovascular outcome trials, but it seems that first-generation sulfonylureas could be linked with potential cardiovascular side effects, while second-generation sulfonylureas appear rather safer. It's time to move to glitazones. June 14, 2007 was a very bad day for rosiglitazone. It was the day of the publication in the New England of this meta-analysis published by Nissen and Wolski, and showing that the rates of myocardial infarction and death from cardiovascular causes were significantly increased in a rosiglitazone group versus the control group, 40%, 64% increase. The consequence of this paper was clearly an exclusion of rosiglitazone, the red card. However, there were at the same time contradictory data, such as this observational study, the Wellpoint study, showing that the risk of cardiovascular events with rosiglitazone, pioglitazone, or comparators were exactly the same. Now, is the story of rosiglitazone definitely over? Never say never in medicine, because in June 2013, 7 years later, the FDA, on the basis of a evaluation of the results, indicated that the restrictions, the prescribing restrictions on rosiglitazone could be or should be lifted. It's of interest to mention that in the field of glitazones, pioglitazone is not really concerned. The proactive study in 2005 in patients in secondary cardiovascular protection showed indeed a reduction in risk, a reduction in cardiovascular risk of 16%, and this was later confirmed, except for heart failure, which was more frequent and more severe in patients treated with pioglitazone than with control. This is the story of glitazones. Now it's time to move to GLP-1 analogs. GLP-1 and incretin-mimetic story is more recent and appear safe. Safe in terms of cardiac protection, safe in terms of cardiac function. I show you some data in the field of GLP-1 agonist. In this paper published in 2014, in dogs with cardiomyopathy, GLP-1 infusion was associated with a significant improvement of all cardiac function parameters. I'll show you also this paper from Son and co-workers. In this ischemia reperfusion injury test, GLP-1 may protect cardiomyocytes from damages during ischemia and reperfusion with a 50% reduction in infarct size. And finally, clinical studies, all clinical studies have shown a reduction in the conventional cardiovascular risk factors, including our own study. This is a study with exenatide. After 1 month, a reduction of 1.6 glycated hemoglobin and a reduction in weight of 4 kilograms. This is a Belgian study with liraglutide showing exactly the same conclusions in terms of weight, in terms of blood pressure reduction, in terms of glycated hemoglobin, 1.5 reduction, and in terms of improvement in lipid profile. And finally, this is a preliminary study which was presented a few days ago concerning the long-term exenatide, and again, there were a reduction in the main conventional risk factors. All these, all studies, all the other studies converge and could account for this, for the conclusions of this meta-analysis published by Monami, and showing that GLP-1 agonists reduced globally by 20% cardiovascular risk. Now, is it final? Is the safety final? We have to remain vigilant in view of a recurrent observation of an increase in heart rate, essentially for long-acting GLP-1 receptor agonists, and therefore we have to wait for the results of the ongoing cardiovascular outcome trials, the preliminary conclusion for lixisenatide showing that the results are neutral, but this will be discussed later. Now, in terms of DPP-4 inhibitors, the cardiovascular status seems very comparable. This is the point of view of Manucci in 2011, showing that DPP-4 compared with placebo or other treatments were associated with a reduced reduction of MACE, irrespective of trial duration, type of agent or comparator. And this result is consolidated by controlled randomized studies. And you know the EXAMINE study with alogliptin and the SAVOR study with saxagliptin. Let's just focus a few moments on the SAVOR study. The SAVOR study included patients, type 2 diabetic patients with high cardiovascular risk. They received, in addition to their conventional treatment, saxagliptin or placebo, and the primary endpoint was cardiovascular. You know that after 2 years, the primary endpoint was exactly comparable in patients treated with saxagliptin or in patients receiving the placebo. So, this is safety. However, there was one concern in this study, and the concern was an increase by 27% of admissions of these patients for heart failure. This was not observed and recently confirmed. This was not confirmed in the EXAMINE study. The rate of admission was increased throughout the study, but most importantly during the first 6 months. There is no clear explanation for that up to now, but there are some risk factors, such as a past history of heart failure, renal dysfunction, or microalbuminuria, or, as recently presented in the European Society of Cardiology, the severe hypoglycemia, which was associated with a multiplication by 5 of the risk. So, it's an unexpected event. It's an unexpected event. However, a recent meta-analysis showed that for all DPP-4 inhibitors together, there was a slight increase, but a significant increase in the risk for heart failure. We have to be vigilant. However, more recent data are reassuring, such as this meta-analysis of 20 studies showing rather a decrease in heart failure for saxagliptin versus comparator. Such as this report of McMurray showing that vildagliptin was associated with improved ventricular compliance. Or finally, such as this paper published a few weeks ago and showing that the rate of hospitalization for heart failure was exactly the same in the patients treated with incretin-based drugs versus 2 oral non-incretin anti-diabetic drugs. There was even a slight but non-significant reduction. So we have also to wait for the ongoing studies, in particular the TECO study, which will be presented at the next ADA. Just a few words concerning the SGLT2 inhibitors. They are recent medications, but we have already some data, some cardiovascular safety data. such as this meta-analysis concerning the dapagliflozin treatment with a reduction of about 20% of risk. Comparable data were reported for canagliflozin with a reduction of 9% of risk after 104 study weeks. And this is not a surprise in view of the effects of these drugs, of these agents, which reduce cardiovascular risk factors, weight, blood pressure, and glycated hemoglobin. So, just one additional comment: modest rises in LDL cholesterol, even if there are rises in HDL and a slight lowering in triglycerides, have led to post-marketing studies asked by the FDA, and we wait for the results of these studies before final conclusion. This is the case for CANA, for DAPA, and for empagliflozin, which will be presented at the next EASD. So my conclusions, dear colleagues, are: the first objective of anti-hyperglycemic treatments, of course, is to control hyperglycemia for preventing chronic complications. The second objective is to be safe on a cardiovascular point of view, or at least neutral. 3, anti-diabetic drugs, with a few exceptions I discussed in 2015, appear rather safe in the cardiovascular field. However, and this last conclusion, long-term studies with specific cardiovascular outcomes should, however, extend and confirm the current data. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very